When consanguinity created the werewolf legend, we look to the most inbred clans of Appalachia. Deep within the secluded hollows of West Virginia's Appalachian Mountains, a region where civilization's reach has always been tenuous, there existed family lineages so isolated they developed their own rules of existence. This is not merely a tale of mountain folklore, but the documented history of the Blackburn clan, a bloodline that became so intertwined through generations it spawned legends that would haunt the American consciousness for decades. It was the year 1887 when physician and anthropologist Dr. William Fletcher first documented the existence of the Blackburn family, residents of an isolated valley near the border of Kentucky and West Virginia. The doctor, commissioned by a newly formed government bureau to study the health conditions of remote Appalachian communities, could never have anticipated what he would discover in the mist-shrouded valley locals called the Pit. Upon my arrival at the settlement, Dr. Fletcher wrote in his field journal dated October 12, 1887, "I was greeted with suspicion by individuals who exhibited such peculiar physical characteristics that I momentarily questioned whether I had encountered an entirely different breed of humans. Their hunched postures, elongated facial features, and pronounced canines created an unsettling impression that would forever remain etched in my memory." The Blackburn clan had established their homestead in this remote valley sometime in the early 1820s when Jeremiah Blackburn, a Scottish immigrant fleeing murder charges, ventured deep into the mountains with his two brothers and their respective wives, who were also siblings. This initial founder population, already closely related, would become increasingly so over the subsequent decades as geographic isolation, suspicion of outsiders, and a deeply ingrained family code prevented the introduction of new genetic material. The valley they selected was accessible only through a single narrow mountain pass, which our historical records indicate would often become impassable during winter months, leaving the clan completely isolated for extended periods. This geographic seclusion, combined with the family's inherent distrust of outsiders following their flight from the law, created perfect conditions for what geneticists would later identify as one of America's most extreme cases of genetic isolation. By the time Dr. Fletcher encountered them in 1887, the Blackburn clan had expanded to approximately 38 individuals spread across three primary family units, all descending from the original founding brothers. What made this case particularly noteworthy was not merely the presence of consanguinity, but the severe and distinctive physical traits that had become concentrated within the lineage. Most prominent among these characteristics was the condition that would later be identified as congenital hypertriosis, excessive hair growth covering much of the body, combined with pronounced dental abnormalities that included elongated canine teeth and significantly altered jaw structures. These features, present in varying degrees throughout the clan, created an appearance so striking that neighboring communities had begun to circulate rumors of wolf people living in the mountains. Dr. Fletcher's meticulous documentation included detailed sketches of several family members, including Jacob Blackburn, who at age 42 displayed the most pronounced manifestation of these traits. The subject exhibits hair coverage extending across approximately 85% of visible skin surface, noted Fletcher, with particularly dense growth along the spine, shoulders, and facial regions. The dental structure shows significant deviation from normal human parameters, with canine teeth extending approximately 0.7 inches beyond the gum line, creating an appearance startlingly reminiscent of canine dentition. What makes this historical case study particularly significant is how the Blackburn clan's genetic isolation intersected with American folklore. By the late 1800s, tales of the wolf family of Appalachia had begun to spread beyond the mountains, contributing significantly to the werewolf mythology that would become entrenched in American popular culture. Yet behind these sensationalized stories was a very human reality, a family trapped in both geographic and genetic isolation whose physical differences made them objects of fear rather than compassion. The Blackburn family's situation represents a profound historical example of how consanguinity, the mating of closely related individuals, can concentrate certain genetic traits within a population. Modern genetic analysis would later identify that the distinctive features observed in the clan resulted from recessive genes that, in a diverse population, would rarely find expression. However, within the closed genetic pool of the Blackburn lineage, these traits became increasingly common with each generation. The most tragic aspect of the Blackburn case was not their physical appearance, notes historical sociologist Dr. Elizabeth Harmon in her 2010, analysis of Drive Fletcher's records, but rather the social isolation that resulted from it. They were effectively imprisoned twice over, first by geography, and second by the fear and superstition their appearance generated among neighboring communities. This fear would have devastating consequences for the clan in the winter of 1888, when we will see how a convergence of natural disaster, superstition, and human cruelty would forever alter the Blackburn lineage and drive them even deeper into isolation. The winter of 1888 arrived with unprecedented ferocity in the Appalachian Mountains. Historical weather records confirm it as one of the harshest seasons ever recorded in the region, with temperatures plummeting to -30 degrees Fahrenheit and snowfall accumulations exceeding 6 feet in the higher elevations. For most mountain communities, this weather presented severe hardships. For the isolated Blackburn clan, it would prove catastrophic. By December of that year, the narrow mountain pass connecting their valley to the outside world had become completely impassable, cutting off any possibility of obtaining supplies from neighboring settlements. The clan, which had always maintained a precarious subsistence through hunting and limited agriculture, found themselves facing starvation as game became increasingly scarce in the frozen landscape. The winter of '88 was like nothing these mountains had seen in living memory, wrote Luther Hopkins, a trapper who would later encounter members of the clan in the spring of 1889. Even the hardiest mountain folk struggled to survive. For those already living on the margins, it must have been nothing short of apocalyptic. Check now if you are already subscribed to the channel. Historical records indicate that by January 1889, the situation within the Blackburn settlement had grown desperate. Their food stores depleted, the clan was forced to make increasingly dangerous forays into the snowbound forest in search of sustenance. It was during one such expedition that the first tragedy struck. Jacob Blackburn and his son Elijah, aged 17, ventured beyond their usual hunting grounds in pursuit of deer tracks spotted near the valley's edge. What they encountered instead was a hunting party from the nearby town of Millerton, the first outsiders the clan had faced in nearly 3 months. What transpired next has been pieced together from multiple accounts, including the later confession of Thomas Ridley, one of the Millerton hunters. Upon encountering the two Blackburns with their distinctive hirsute appearance, hunched postures, and pronounced dental features, the hunting party reacted with immediate terror. "I thought we'd stumbled upon demons," Ridley would later state in his 1905 deathbed confession. "Jacob approached us, calling out in that strange guttural way they had of speaking. In the dim light, with his face covered in frost and hair, and those teeth. God help me. I believed he was something unhuman." The hunters opened fire, killing Jacob instantly. Young Elijah, though wounded, managed to escape into the forest and return to the settlement with news of his father's death. This tragedy marked the beginning of what historical records now refer to as the Purging, a systematic campaign by neighboring communities to drive the Blackburn clan from their valley. Fear is a powerful motivator, observed anthropologist Margaret Callaway in her 1967 study of Appalachian isolated communities. The combination of the clan's unusual appearance, the desperate conditions of that winter, and the deeply superstitious nature of the mountain culture created perfect conditions for scapegoating. The Blackburns became literal monsters in the eyes of their neighbors, an embodiment of the hardship and suffering brought by that merciless winter. Within weeks of Jacob's death, rumors had spread throughout neighboring settlements that wolf people were emerging from the mountains to steal livestock and potentially children. Despite no evidence of such actions, by February, armed parties had begun to make expeditions into the mountains with the explicit purpose of locating and eliminating the Blackburn settlement. The historical record confirms that on February 17, 1889, a group of approximately 30 armed men from 3 surrounding communities converged on the valley. What they found was a settlement already devastated by hunger and cold, with only 24 surviving members of the original clan. The scene described by even the participants portrays a community in the last stages of starvation, notes historian Dr. Robert Keller. Multiple accounts mention children with distended bellies, adults who had lost significant body mass, and at least 4 recent graves dug into the frozen ground. Despite this clear evidence of their suffering, the fear inspired by their appearance prevented any humanitarian response. Rather than offering assistance, the armed party delivered an ultimatum. The Blackburn clan had 3 days to vacate the valley or face violent removal. With no other options, the surviving members gathered what few possessions they could carry and departed their ancestral home, fracturing into smaller family units as they sought refuge deeper in the most remote regions of the mountains. This dispersal of the clan would prove pivotal to their subsequent history. As the smaller family groups were forced to adopt different survival strategies, some would eventually attempt integration with mainstream society, while others would retreat even further from human contact, reinforcing the very isolation that had shaped their distinctive genetics. The largest faction, led by Elijah Blackburn, now bearing both physical and emotional scars from his encounter with the hunters, relocated to an even more inaccessible region locally known as Devil's Backbone, a jagged limestone ridge approximately 20 miles northeast of their original settlement. There they would establish a new homestead that would remain unknown to the outside world for nearly 2 decades. The winter of 1888–89 represents a critical turning point in the Blackburn lineage, explains genetic historian Dr. Thomas Wells. The population bottleneck created by the deaths that winter, combined with the subsequent fracturing of the clan into smaller breeding groups, accelerated the genetic concentration of their distinctive traits. In essence, the persecution they faced for their appearance forced them into conditions that would make those same traits even more pronounced in future generations. The cruel irony of this situation cannot be overstated. The very characteristics that made the Blackburns objects of fear and persecution would become even more concentrated as a direct result of that persecution, a vicious cycle of difference, isolation, and genetic reinforcement that would continue well into the 20th century. In the spring of 1907, nearly 2 decades after the dispersal of the original Blackburn clan, a young physician named Dr. Howard Grant arrived in the region. Fresh from medical school at Johns Hopkins University, Dr. Grant had been assigned to establish a rural medical practice serving the remote communities of McDowell County, West Virginia. His academic background in the emerging field of genetics would prove crucial to uncovering the next chapter in the Blackburn story. My first indication that something unusual existed in these mountains came not from direct encounter, but from the persistent local folklore, Dr. Grant wrote in his medical journal in June 1907. Nearly every patient who visited my office, upon learning I was new to the region, felt compelled to warn me about the wolf people said to inhabit the most remote hollows. I initially dismissed these as typical mountain superstitions, not unlike beliefs in haunts or granny witches that pervaded the culture. I would soon discover my error. On July 8, 1907, Dr. Grant received an unexpected visitor at his modest clinic in the town of Welsh. Silas Moore, a local trapper, arrived supporting a young man who exhibited precisely the distinctive physical characteristics described in the local legends: excessive hair growth covering much of his visible skin, pronounced dental abnormalities, and a distinctly hunched posture. The young man was Isaac Blackburn, grandson of the original Jacob Blackburn and son of Elijah. At approximately 16 years of age, he had suffered a severe leg injury after falling from a ridge while hunting, resulting in an open fracture that had become infected. Despite the clan's traditional avoidance of outsiders, Elijah had reluctantly sent his son with Moore, one of the few local residents who maintained occasional trading contact with the hidden Blackburn settlement, to seek medical attention when the infection worsened. The patient presented with an advanced infection of the right tibia, Dr. Grant recorded. The wound showed signs of rudimentary treatment with poultices of what appeared to be various medicinal herbs, but the infection had progressed beyond what such measures could address. More remarkable than the injury itself, however, were the patient's physiological characteristics. Check now if you are already subscribed to the channel. Dr. Grant, with his background in genetics, recognized immediately that Isaac's condition was not the result of disease or supernatural affliction, but of inherited genetic traits concentrated through generations of consanguinity. After treating the immediate infection and stabilizing the fracture, Grant began the delicate process of gaining the young man's trust. Through patient conversation, I have been able to piece together elements of the Blackburn history unknown to outside society, Grant wrote in August 1907. After several weeks of treating Isaac, the patient speaks a highly distinctive dialect that combines archaic English constructions with unique linguistic innovations developed within their isolated community. Once this communication barrier was overcome, he revealed the existence of a settlement comprising 3 primary family units, all descended from the original Blackburn brothers, now residing in an extremely remote limestone cave system. What made Dr. Grant's discovery particularly significant was his scientific approach to the situation. Rather than responding with fear or superstition, he recognized the Blackburn case as a unique opportunity to study the effects of genetic isolation in a human population. With Isaac's gradual cooperation, Grant began to compile the first comprehensive family tree of the Blackburn lineage, documenting the intricate patterns of interrelation that had shaped their distinctive traits. "The patient has confirmed what my medical training suggested," Grant noted in September 1907. "Marriages within the clan have been exclusively endogamous for at least 4 generations, with first-cousin pairings being the predominant pattern. In several instances, uncle-niece relationships have occurred, and in at least 2 cases, father-daughter pairings have been recorded. The resulting genetic concentration has produced a remarkably consistent expression of traits that, in a broader population, would likely remain recessive." As Isaac's injury healed, Dr. Grant faced an ethical dilemma. His scientific curiosity and genuine concern for the health of the isolated community urged him to visit the settlement and provide medical care to others who might need it. However, he also recognized that outside interference, even with benevolent intentions, had historically brought disaster to the clan. "I have decided that any approach must be made with extreme caution and only with the explicit consent of the community's leadership," Grant wrote. "Isaac has agreed to convey a message to his father, explaining my medical interest and offering assistance without any requirement that the settlement's location be disclosed to the broader world." In October 1907, Grant received his response. Elijah Blackburn, now approximately 35 years old and the acknowledged leader of the main Blackburn settlement, agreed to meet the doctor, but only at a designated location away from their home and only if Grant came alone. The meeting, which took place on October 23, 1907, at a remote hunting cabin, would prove transformative for both the doctor and the clan. Grant's clinical notes describe Elijah as exhibiting the most pronounced manifestation of the lineage's distinctive traits I have yet observed, with near-complete hypertrichosis and dental development that extends significantly beyond normal human parameters. Despite his intimidating appearance, Elijah demonstrated remarkable intelligence and a sophisticated understanding of his community's situation. He comprehends perfectly that their physical differences result from the family's isolation, Grant observed, though he frames this understanding in terms of blood calling to blood rather than genetic science. More surprisingly, he expressed explicit awareness that introducing new blood into their lineage would alter these traits in future generations. What emerged from this initial meeting was an unprecedented arrangement. Elijah would allow Dr. Grant to provide medical care to the settlement and document their family history for scientific purposes. In exchange, Grant would maintain absolute secrecy about their location and serve as an intermediary between the clan and the outside world when necessary resources could not be obtained through their traditional means. This arrangement would continue for nearly 7 years, during which time Dr. Grant compiled what remains the most comprehensive documentation of a genetically isolated human community in American history. His detailed records, which include medical examinations of 31 members of the extended clan, photographs, genealogical charts, and observations of their unique cultural adaptations, provide an invaluable window into the human consequences of extreme genetic isolation. "The most remarkable aspect of the Blackburn case," Grant wrote in his final summary in 1914, "is not the physical manifestations of their consanguinity, but the complex culture they have developed in response to their isolation. They have created an intricate oral tradition that transforms their distinctive traits into marks of special status rather than deformity, positioning themselves not as outcasts but as a people set apart for a specific purpose. This psychological adaptation has allowed them to maintain dignity in circumstances that might otherwise lead to despair." While Dr. Grant maintained his promise of discretion regarding the Blackburn clan's location, the very existence of his research, portions of which were published in obscure medical journals under pseudonyms to protect the family's privacy, gradually brought renewed attention to the wolf people of Appalachia. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, as American popular culture became increasingly fascinated with tales of the strange and macabre, the legend of the Blackburns began to take on a life of its own. By 1925, references to the Wolf family of West Virginia had appeared in at least 17 different pulp magazines, notes cultural historian Dr. Miranda Jenkins. These sensationalized accounts bore little resemblance to the actual Blackburn clan, instead portraying them as feral, barely human creatures with supernatural abilities and predatory tendencies. These fictional representations would have profound consequences for the real family they purported to describe. One publication in particular, Weird Tales of the Mountains October 1927 issue, featured a lurid cover depicting a wolf-like humanoid attacking travelers on a mountain path. The accompanying story, The Beasts of Devil's Backbone by author Harlan Blackwood, claimed to be based on true accounts of the infamous wolf clan that continues to prey upon unwary travelers in the wilds of Appalachia. Now, the story reached a wide audience and sparked a renewed interest in locating the actual family. This renewed attention coincided with significant changes in the accessibility of the Appalachian region. The expansion of coal mining operations throughout West Virginia had led to the construction of new roads and rail lines penetrating previously isolated areas. Logging companies were pushing ever deeper into the mountains, bringing with them workers who carried these sensationalized stories of the wolf people. The period between 1925 and 1935 represented an existential threat to the Blackburn clan's continued isolation, explains Appalachian historian Dr. William Summerfield. The physical barriers that had previously protected them were literally being dismantled by industrial development, while the mythologized versions of their existence were attracting exactly the kind of attention they had always sought to avoid. Historical records indicate that in the summer of 1931, this feared encounter finally occurred. A geological survey team mapping potential coal seams in the limestone formations of McDowell County stumbled upon one of the smaller Blackburn settlements, a group of 3 families led by Thomas Blackburn, nephew of Elijah. The survey team's report, filed with the Eastern Mining Consortium on July 17, 1931, describes the encounter in detached technical language that nevertheless conveys their shock. Site survey interrupted by encounter with approximately 12 to 15 individuals inhabiting a modified cave system. Subjects displayed highly unusual physical characteristics including excessive hirsutism and pronounced dental abnormalities. Team withdrew from area after subjects displayed defensive posturing and vocalizations. Recommend reassignment of survey grid to avoid further contact. What the dry corporate report fails to mention is that one of the survey team members, Charles Holloway, took several photographs of the Blackburn family members before the team's departure. These images, the first visual documentation of the clan since Dr. Grant's carefully guarded medical photographs, would soon find their way to the offices of the Charleston Gazette-Star. On August 3, 1931, the newspaper published a front-page article titled Wolf People of Appalachia, Myth Confirmed, alongside one of Holloway's photographs showing 3 male members of the Blackburn clan standing at the entrance to their cave dwelling. The article described them as human beings so deformed by generations of improper relations that they have come to resemble the very beasts of the forest. This exposure, combining lurid sensationalism with the cruel reality of the family's actual appearance, triggered a catastrophic sequence of events. Within weeks, curiosity seekers, reporters, and self-proclaimed monster hunters began making expeditions into the region, explicitly seeking out the Blackburn settlements. Local residents, seeing potential profit in the situation, offered their services as guides, some legitimately knowing the general area of the settlements, others simply exploiting outside interest. August through October 1931 essentially became an organized hunt for the Blackburn family, notes sociologist Dr. Rebecca Thornton. Historical records confirm at least 27 different expeditions into the mountains during this period, varying in size from individual reporters to groups of up to 15 people. The humanitarian disaster this represented for the Blackburn clan cannot be overstated. The most detailed account of this period comes from the journal of James Harrison, a reporter for the Pittsburgh Courier who joined one such expedition but became increasingly disturbed by its nature. What began as journalistic curiosity has devolved into something approaching a lynch mob, he wrote on September 12, 1931. The men I'm traveling with speak openly of capturing one of the wolf people to display in a carnival sideshow. They carry not only cameras but ropes and chains. I have made the pretense of injury to separate myself from the group and will return to civilization at first light. For the Blackburn clan, These intrusions represented an existential threat unlike any they had previously faced. The main settlement, still led by Elijah, now in his late 50s, made the difficult decision to abandon their established home of over 40 years and retreat to even more inaccessible terrain. The fall of 1931 marks the last verified location of the main Blackburn settlement, confirms historian Summerfield. Records indicate they moved northward into the most remote regions of the Monongahela National Forest. The smaller satellite settlements appear to have dispersed entirely, with some family units possibly attempting to integrate into mainstream society, while others may have joined the main clan in their retreat. By 1932, public interest in the Wolf people had begun to wane as the Great Depression commanded national attention. The expeditions gradually ceased, and the Blackburn clan once again faded from public consciousness, though their legend remained firmly entrenched in Appalachian folklore. What few outside observers realized was that this period of intense persecution had profound effects on the clan's genetic future. The stress and displacement resulted in the deaths of several elder members, while the younger generation, those born after 1900, began to question the sustainability of their isolated existence. Historical evidence suggests that sometime between 1932 and 1935, a significant ideological split occurred within the Blackburn leadership, explains anthropologist Dr. Calloway. While Elijah and the older generation advocated for continued isolation and the preservation of their distinctive lineage, younger members, particularly those who had experienced some contact with the outside world, began to advocate for limited exogamy, the introduction of new genetic material through relationships with outsiders. This internal conflict would ultimately shape the fate of the Blackburn bloodline and set the stage for their gradual transition from historical reality to enduring American legend. The final chapter in the documented history of the Blackburn clan unfolds across the middle decades of the 20th century, as modernization and cultural shifts gradually eroded the isolation that had defined their existence for over a century. The years following the Great Depression and World War II brought unprecedented changes to Appalachia: electrification projects, expanded road systems, and increasing government presence in previously neglected regions. By 1950, there were few places left in the Appalachian Mountains that could truly be described as isolated from modern society, explains regional historian Dr. Emma Cartwright. The very concept of an entire community remaining unknown to outside authorities had become virtually impossible. For the Blackburn clan, this meant that their traditional strategy of retreat and seclusion was no longer viable. The last verified documentation of the main Blackburn settlement comes from an unexpected source, a 1953 United States Geological Survey aerial mapping project. Photographs taken of the northeastern section of the Monongahela National Forest reveal what analysts later identified as a small clearing containing approximately 6 to 8 structures of rudimentary construction, consistent with an isolated homestead rather than recreational use. The location, while never publicly disclosed in respect of the family's privacy, has been confirmed by historians as the final known residence of the main Blackburn lineage. What happens to the clan after this final sighting has been pieced together through a combination of local records, oral histories from surrounding communities, and the groundbreaking genealogical research conducted by Dr. Laura Blackburn, no relation, at West Virginia University in the 1990s. This research suggests that rather than a dramatic conclusion, the Blackburn story ended with a quiet integration, the gradual absorption of the remaining family members into mainstream society. Marriage and death records from counties surrounding the Monongahela National Forest show a pattern consistent with the dispersal of the clan beginning in the mid-1950s, notes Dr. Laura Blackburn. Individuals with the Blackburn surname, born approximately between 1925 to 1935, begin appearing in official documents, often marrying individuals from established local families. Most significantly, these records note decreasing presence of the distinctive physical traits that had defined earlier generations. This pattern aligns with accounts from residents of small communities like Helvetia, Pickens, and Mornville, who recall the occasional appearance of unusual-looking individuals seeking work or supplies during the 1950s and early 1960s. These individuals, while clearly bearing some of the Blackburn physical characteristics, showed them in much less pronounced forms than described in earlier historical accounts. The genetic evidence suggests what we would expect from introduction of new genetic material into the previously isolated Blackburn bloodline, explains geneticist Dr. Sarah Cohen. The distinctive traits, hypertrichosis, dental abnormalities, and skeletal modifications, being recessive in nature, would begin to appear with decreasing frequency and severity once marriages outside the clan became common. Within just 2 or 3 generations of outbreeding, these characteristics could become extremely rare or disappear entirely from the visible phenotype, though the genes themselves would remain present in the population. This genetic dilution coincided with significant advances in medical understanding and treatment of congenital conditions. Those Blackburn descendants born after 1950 who did manifest some of the clan's distinctive traits would have had access to medical interventions unavailable to earlier generations, from orthodontic treatments for dental abnormalities to early electrolysis techniques for managing hypertrichosis. What we see in this final chapter is not the extinction of the Blackburn lineage, but rather its gradual normalization, observes sociologist Dr. Thornton. Their genes continue to flow through numerous family lines across West Virginia, Kentucky, and beyond. But the extreme expression of their distinctive traits has been moderated through both genetic outbreeding and medical intervention. Check now if you are already subscribed to the channel. Perhaps the most poignant epilogue to the Blackburn story comes from a 1987 oral history interview conducted with Mary Williams, née Blackburn, identified through genealogical research as the great-granddaughter of Elijah Blackburn. Born in 1943, Williams displayed only minimal manifestations of the family's distinctive traits: slight hypertrichosis on her arms and back, easily concealed by clothing, and minor dental abnormalities corrected through orthodontic in her youth. "My grandfather never spoke much about the family history," Williams recounted in her interview. "But I remember him saying that there was a time when our people had to hide in the deepest woods because others couldn't see past what we looked like to who we really were. He told me that the family chose to fade away rather than keep living in fear, that they decided it was better for the children to look more like everyone else, even if it meant losing something that made us special." This conscious decision to prioritize integration and safety over the preservation of their distinctive lineage marks the true conclusion of the Blackburn clan as a separate and isolated community. By the 1970s, their direct descendants had become largely indistinguishable from the broader Appalachian population in which they had been absorbed. Yet, while the physical reality of the wolf people faded, their legend continued to grow throughout the latter half of the 20th century. The story of the Blackburns became firmly embedded in American folklore, inspiring countless campfire tales, regional ghost stories, and eventually horror films and novels that bore little resemblance to the actual family. The transformation of the Blackburn story from historical reality to modern legend reveals much about how we, as a society, process difference and isolation, reflects cultural anthropologist Dr. James Morrison. The actual history of a family with genetic distinctions, forced into isolation by fear and prejudice, becomes mythologized into tales of monstrous others lurking in the wild places. We forget that the monsters in these stories were created not by supernatural forces, but by human choices, the choice to ostracize, to persecute, and to sensationalize human difference. Today, genetic testing suggests that thousands of Americans, particularly those with roots in the Appalachian region, carry Blackburn DNA within their genetic makeup. The distinctive traits that once defined the clan have been so diluted that they rarely manifest in visible form, though occasional cases of hypertrichosis or unusual dental development in the region are sometimes attributed to this lineage by those familiar with the history. The Blackburn story is ultimately about resilience, concludes historian Dr. Cartwright. A family faced with extraordinary challenges, both biological and social, who survived for generations against overwhelming odds, and who ultimately found their way back into the broader human community. Their physical differences may have faded, but their legacy persists in both the genetic heritage of the region and in the enduring folklore their existence inspired. In the misty hollows of Appalachia, where cell phone reception still falters and GPS systems sometimes lose their way, locals continue to tell tales of the wolf people who once roamed these mountains. Few realize that behind these legends lies the very real story of the Blackburn clan, a family whose isolation created distinctive differences, whose differences triggered fear, and whose fear-induced deeper isolation created the very legends that continue to haunt the American imagination to this day. *****. If you're already subscribed to this channel, confirm it, and make sure to click that button now. You won't find these meticulously researched historical cases of isolated family lines anywhere else, cases that reveal the shocking truth behind America's most enduring legends. If you watched all the way through, leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end," so I can get to know who truly appreciates these stories from our channel. Don't forget to like this video and share it with anyone interested in America's forgotten history and the scientific realities behind our most enduring legends.